Listening to another edition of the ATACS podcast. We are adults, we talk about cool stuff, and today we are here to talk about God of War Ragnarok, Sony's latest for the PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5. And today I am your host. I am Flex from Raleigh, North Carolina. Joining me, we have a panel of Norsemen to help us dissect this mythological adventure. I am joined by Nate from Clayton, North Carolina. How are you today, sir?
Doing fine. I don't think anybody brought the mead.
Well, Paul, that was your job, Paul from Atlanta. Why did you not bring the mead today?
Because I really thought we were talking about vampire survivors, so I got a little mixed up on the memo here.
The garlic at you. That's what I smell.
Meat is delicious, and I apologize to not bringing any to our virtual roundtable.
All right, and lastly, but not leastly, we have Will from Wendell, North Carolina. How are you, Will? That is good to hear.
I'm well.
The date today is January 1st, 2023. We decided God of War Ragnarok needed to wait until the new year to be discussed. And here we are.
Thing to do with the fact that it took me.
Yeah, I was trying to
finish this game.
I was trying to find a amusing way to put the blame on Nate, but
my brain's not there. It's okay.
It is January 1st, 2023. This is a very important note here. This is a spoiler cast. There will be spoilers for God of War Ragnarok. And by extension, there will also be spoilers for God of War 2018. Any previous God of War game is on the table, we should say. In fact, we will almost certainly mention things that happened in multiple previous God of War games. So if you are concerned about any God of War spoilers, this is your one warning up front. Because soon they're probably going to start flying fast and loose. And with those introductions out of the way, I think I hit it all. We're going to get rolling here. And our first table setting question is going to be to kind of set up what everyone's experience with the God of War franchise is. Because this is not the first God of War game. This is not the second God of War game. This is like the 8th or 9th God of War game. There have been a lot of these things. So I guess quickly for me, and I think Nate and Will might be somewhat similar to me, but I did start with the original, the OG God of War on PS2, played that trilogy, God of War 1, 2, 3. At some point I played the Chains of Olympus, the first PSP game, and then I've played the two Norse games, God of War 2018 and now Ragnarok. Quite enjoyed the original trilogy, and these new ones as well. As we'll dig into Ragnarok. But yeah, I've been around since the beginning. Haven't played quite all of them. Missed one of the PSP ones. Missed Ascension. Missed the iPhone game, the mobile game. Betrayal, I think it was called.
I did not know there was a mobile game.
I think it's called God of War Betrayal. But anyway.
Okay.
Nate, what's your God of War history?
Yeah, it's pretty quick because I think it's the exact same. I think I've played all the exact same games as you. I have liked all of them to slightly varying degrees, despite their flaws. They're still fun action games with ridiculous, over-the-top stories. But yeah, long and short of it, I think we've played the same exact games, and I've generally liked all of them.
What about you, Mr. Will?
So, yeah, I actually, I didn't have a PlayStation for the longest time. I was in that that sort of 360 camp, and that was the first console I bought after a long period of time. So it wasn't until probably like 2012 or so that I borrowed a friend's PlayStation 3, and I was like, well, what have I missed? And so I went back, and I kind of went ham on these God of Wars. So I've played 1, 2, 3, Ascension, both the PSP games, and then of course the 2 new ones. As a general rule, I like them. They're fun power fantasies. They have a great sense of scale, a lot of action, a lot of hype. So it's been a good time.
Kratos, the ultimate hype man.
All right, and Paul, what is your experience?
Mostly watching you play them in College Flex. I did try to go back and play some of the earlier God of Wars on PS2, I think it was, and never really got into them too much. So a lot of my knowledge of the series has definitely been secondhand. It was fun to watch. Some of the dialogue in those earlier games were pretty fun. We'll just put it that way. But no, I didn't really play any of them until I got to the 2018 God of War and now Ragnarok.
All right, so you have played both 2018 and Ragnarok.
Mm-hmm.
None of us have played the Betrayal, the mobile game, so clearly we're all noobs. And with that, we'll start talking about the current game in question, God of War Ragnarok, which is a direct follow-up to the 2018 game simply called God of War. I'm going to refer to it as God of War 2018 to avoid confusion. And this game follows directly from that one. As far as we know, they have said it closes the book on the Norse chapter. We'll see if they actually stick with that, given how well this game sells. And the first thing we're going to talk about up front is, y'all, this game looks real good. They got some talented artists and some talented cinematographers and motion capture artists, whatever you want to say, actors. Like all of this game, it's like, I mean, Sony for a while now has spent a premium on their premier franchises, their Uncharted's, their Last of Us's, their Horizons, and of course God of War. Like this is in that top tier, quote unquote, prestige Sony game. And yeah, playing this game on the PlayStation 5 looks like this is kind of the first. I mean, I guess you could say Horizons Forbidden West is also in this boat, but this is kind of the first really big prestige game for PlayStation 5, like since the new console came out.
Yeah, and I really feel like that in a lot of ways they knocked it out of the park, not just from a technical standpoint, but a lot of the in-game cutscenes. I mean, it's just the same in-game, right? It's not shooting to an FMV or anything crazy like that. But the way that the game will transition you from one character to another one when you're changing who you're controlling, the way that the game will sort you from one scene to the next. Like if you're taking one of the portals, like the way that you'll like move through that directly into the next scene that they're trying to show you like cinematically. I really felt that for a lot of that stuff that was outside of the actual like gameplay loops, you could tell that they had a plan for how they were wanting to execute a lot of this game's cinematography. And just from the standpoint of transitions, God of War 2018 had a lot of talk about how that was like one long shot almost the whole game, right? And that was really cool. And this game kind of kept the spirit of that one shot, even as it would change from you controlling one character to another. Nothing was ever really jarring in my perception, even though there was a lot of movement from, whether you're controlling Kratos or Atreus, or you're going from a dream sequence, to somewhere else. I mean, they did a really good job with that. So just from the sort of, I guess, more traditional artistic point of view, they spent a lot of resources, not just in all the technical aspects, but you could tell that they had artists and they had people on staff who were working really hard to like have that to meet or exceed that God of War 2018 type of cinematography, because 2018 had a lot of that stuff too, and there's a billion articles about it, but they really did that very well, and I think that they went a level higher in this one with some of the character transitions.
Yeah, a couple of things that I thought were kind of fun to point out. One, is my favorite, probably one of my favorite animations in the game is there are certain walls, and sometimes they're floors, sometimes they're ceilings that have, I think I can't even remember what exactly, it's like a blue cross on them, but essentially you're going to have to like grab into those with your Blades of Chaos, and Kratos will slam himself through whatever surface that is, and I always felt like there was a certain intensity, and I mean, he really served as the ultimate hype man for me when he was slamming through these walls, because I would get turned. Also, one thing that's really interesting is if you look at the realms, I don't know if you guys ever kind of slowed down and just looked at the realms, but there are these really interesting tiny like flora and fauna that you find. I think it's in oh my God, is it Alfheim where the elves kick it?
Yeah, that's where the
I'm
elves
trying to
are. Is
remember what
Yeah,
Alfheim.
I
Alfheim
might
is
even be thinking
the
of Vanaheim.
elf realm.
Okay, so there are these little turtles who have these little like plants growing off the back of their shells, which are kind of amazing. I don't know, maybe if we ever post this thing, we can get a picture of these little turtles. And there's also these like crabs in Muspelheim, I think it is,
Yep.
wherever the trials are, right? And they have little like iron masks over the top of their shells. And so they're like these sort of like cute slash hardcore little crustaceans that are rocking out in the different realms. But these I don't know. I just noticed these things. I took little screenshots of them when I was playing.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Yeah,
I just
those
wanted to call
environments are
attention to
very
them.
dense. And like you have your path that you're walking, and everything around you is just like beautifully dense, alive worlds that all look very distinct based on which realm you're in. I also want to just follow up on what I was talking about with the one long shot thing that these games do. And I generally think it works fine, and I can't imagine the amount of planning that has to go into pulling that off as well as they do. But the points of this game that always cracked me up are when a character was laying down to sleep, and I was like, "Oh, how are they gonna pull this long shot off when this guy's going to sleep?" Which happens like 5 or 6 times.
Yeah, I feel like
That always cracked me up.
usually they like zoom in on their face and like the background becomes black and then it zooms back out and you're in like a dream sequence or something.
Yeah, or they just startle awake because something happened, and there's always some reason that they don't just like have to hold the camera on somebody's face for 6 hours while they sleep.
Yeah, and you're right. That happened like maybe 5 times, and the fact that they didn't like reuse an animation or something like that, or they didn't come up with like one way to do it, but they had something unique for each one of those kind of things. Like, that just shows a level of quality, and as Flex was saying, a level of triple anus that kind of went into the game, because they obviously spent a dollar or two there.
Yeah, and I do find I don't know why just Kratos laying on his back sleeping just like big burly man just always crossing his arms or no I think he puts his hands like interlocked. Anyway, it's
Yeah,
just for some reason like having played like 6 or 7 or whatever of these games, like this guy who's just a god-killing machine is just like, all right, Kratos tired now. He go night night. It's just I don't know, funny to me. Um, Not really relevant to anything. One thing that's so when you fast travel because they have their one shot, their one camera shot. You go into that whatever magical realm
tree,
thing.
the
Yeah,
Yggdrasil.
Yep.
yeah. Are they masking loads there, do you think?
No,
I think
because if you don't walk at all, like the door will appear in front of you whenever the text is or whenever the dialogue's done. I thought the
Yeah,
tree was just for dialogue and not for masking loads, but I could be wrong about that.
think it is masking a load, but the loads are pretty short if there's no dialogue.
yeah, but that's what I'm like. Is the dialogue masking the loading? Is what I'm saying.
I don't think so. I think because when you get, and we'll get to this, but when you get to the point where you're not seeing any more dialogue and those transition sequences, it happens really fast.
Okay.
So I don't think. I think
I never
the dialogue is
Yeah, I
just
can
there
second that.
as an extra thing while you're traveling between realms.
Okay. I never got to a point where there was no dialogue, so I'm like, because when I played God of War 2018, I'm pretty sure playing that on a PS4 they were masking loads.
Right,
There's
and it
no-
may
there's
be
no
that
way.
on the PS4 they need that dialogue to mask the loads. I don't know, but the PS5
So
seems
maybe
able
it
to
gets carried.
load it.
Yeah. So maybe it just gets carried over on the PS5 because that's how they had to do it. Because there is a PS4 version of this game.
Right. So
Yeah,
that
maybe
could be
Yeah,
so maybe the
so
dialogue is masking PS4 loading.
yeah,
could be.
and because there definitely was one of those times that I went into Yggdrasil and there was no dialogue because there was no companion, and then like it was like I walked in and then it's like as soon as I got there, the door frame came up and I just walked straight out.
And as soon as you hit circle on the door frame, you are immediately in the new area. So
Yeah.
it's a very short load, but I think there is a load happening.
I think the more blatant load is the wall cracks that you squeeze through.
That's
I
probably
think those
true.
are the more blatant loads. I'm trying to remember where I was when I was doing this, but I think it was somewhere in Midgard. But there's one area which, even to get into the area, there's just a crack in the wall, and every time I went through the crack, I was like, all right, let's go find the rest of this
Yeah, I
level
think that's
or
the one
whatever it
thing
is.
from a technical standpoint that was like, I wish I could just fast travel quicker without uh 30 plus seconds of banter. But I mean, otherwise, this game, yeah, like as all of you have been saying, like just the level of detail in the environments, the quality of the animations, the cinematography, um,
You
all of
even
the
talk
audio
about the
stuff.
voice acting.
Yeah, all the audio is great. The voice acting, the actors all did a really stellar job, I think. Um, and the music's maybe not like amazing, but it gets used effectively. Like I guess any Hollywood like blockbuster musical
Yeah.
score gets used. Um, yeah, like all the production stuff here is top notch. I feel like I'm a I'm a sucker for a good skybox, a good like vista background, and there's a couple moments in the game where you're up somewhere high and can like look down off a cliff and see an area. And that always looked really nice. I would always pause there and kind of just soak it in for a minute. I think with that we're gonna do a somewhat of a pivot to kind of the mechanical aspects of this game, stuff like the combat, the loot, the gear, the mission structure, the side quest structure, collectibles, like just kind of all of that mechanical stuff. Kind of how we felt about that.
Don't worry, we'll get to the plot and story stuff later.
Yep, we will for sure. Um, a lot of this game's mechanics, and we can spend less time on this because a lot of it is very similar to God of War 2018. Follows a lot of the same structure. You start the game with the axe, which is still super rad. Being able to throw the axe and call it back at any time works the same way it did in 2018. Still feels great. That was one of the best parts of that game, and I'd say probably still one of the best parts of this game. The Blades of Chaos you start with right out the gate, which I'm glad. I'm glad you just start with them and they didn't conjure up a way to to put that behind any kind of barrier. And yeah, a lot of the combat mechanics are similar. You have a skill tree that you gain experience and go through. Um, you still have gear that you collect. So I want to talk about Atreus and other playable characters. I want to table that for a second. So my first question to you all is kind of all the things that was already in place as of the previous game, God of War 2018. Do you feel like they made any tweaks to that were for better or worse, or do you feel like it was mostly the same, or like, I'm thinking of like skill trees and gear and how the combat felt and like those kind of things, like those kind of core staple things. Like, do you have any major takeaways from that, or is your takeaway kind of like, oh yeah, they just did God of War 2018 again and it worked just as well as that game did? Or you got anything, Will?
Yeah. Um, I guess one thing that it seems like this particular iteration is interested in, I feel like when 2018 came out, there was a lot of, I guess, focus on depowering Kratos to some degrees. He was sort of um, I don't know if it was because he's like an older dude, he's past the prime or whatever, but I feel like that was something that kind of carried on, and it's certainly there are times when he sort of has a flourish, almost like that initial fight with Thor. There's that little flourish of like, oh man, this is what he was like, and every once in a while he'll do something, you'll be like, oh, okay, he's still in there, But it does seem like this particular game is less interested in that. And so I remember one of the key thoughts I had after it was, and I just played, I guess that's one thing to talk about too, is I just played on the give me balance, I guess, which is your basic, your central normal difficulty or whatever. But the only thing in the game that to me felt strong was actually Atreus had this move that if you had it fully upgraded, it would let out like 3 wolves. It was like a runic attack of his or something. And that was the only thing in the game that to me felt like it did a substantial amount of damage to enemies. I'd walk up to some guy, drop like both of my runic attacks for one weapon, switch to another weapon, both my runic attacks, switch to another weapon, both my runic attacks, and I dealt like 2/3 of a single segment of health damage to the guy. So I don't know. I mean, I guess that was one of the things that I think about when I think about these two particular games. And so I know I probably shouldn't talk about them together, but I guess I do see it as sort of like it's almost like a pre 2018 and a post 2018 Kratos. And so I guess for me, I kept trying to find something that really felt like I was really like giving it to the enemies, and I just so I was digging through these skill trees and digging through these different armor pieces and runic attacks, and it just never felt like I really found anything. And I enjoyed the game nonetheless, but I just
Will,
remember that feeling.
Can I
as
tell
I was
you the
playing.
pro strat to really give it to any enemy in this game? You just bare
Tell me.
knuckle box everything without using the weapons, and find anything that gives stun damage, and just throw as much stun damage as you can at enemies, and then you just tear everything in half.
Okay, well, hey, I was too busy trying to
No,
use the
I
weapons,
100%
guess,
agree that I found all the runic attacks to be really like underwhelming in terms of raw damage, and they were the only real use I could find for those was like big area of effects and status effects. Yeah, and
the
iframes. Yep.
iframes. To me, it was like the iframes. It's like, well, okay, so I get some iframes if I hit this attack. Let's just go
Yep.
ahead and
But
do
almost
that
every
out
single
there.
hard encounter, every single hard boss in this game, I beat just with bare fists.
That's incredible. I did not spend hardly any
That's
time
great.
bare fist brawling. The only time I did is if I threw my axe and just immediately had to start attacking and didn't switch to a weapon because that can be kind of clunky sometimes.
Yeah. So the specific.
There were a couple of abilities that allowed you to get it, like powered you up a little bit once you threw your axe, and
Yeah,
then
so I
you ran
used
out and
that.
hit the
I had
fist or something like
one.
that.
My build was basically centered around punching people. So I, by the end, I had an armor set that. I know I'm going on a tangent here. I'm sorry. I had an armor set that inflicted poison damage on enemies if you block them or hit them with unarmed attacks. If you poison somebody, then that lowers their at enemy level, which means you automatically do more damage to them and take less damage from them if your level difference gets skewed. And
Yeah, she gave you that armor for
yes,
bringing
I
her the
remember that. That was a
mysterious
side
orb.
quest reward. And then the other part of that set increased the damage you dealt to poisoned enemies. So I would just bare knuckle box, poison them, that builds stagger really fast because that's the main thing that punching does. It doesn't do as much damage as weapons, but it builds a lot of stun. So that would either let you do like the finisher attacks if it was a smaller enemy, or bosses that you can't do the finisher attacks on. It would just, when you build their stun meter all the way up, it just does a big chunk of damage and stun locks them a little more. And so then I picked any runic attacks that basically increase stun or would give me iframes or that kind of thing, and I would just punch people. It's
Now
pretty
I kind of want to
fun,
go play through
actually.
the game again, but okay.
Yeah, I think my approach sounds maybe somewhat similar to Will, is because you have so many different things you can pop between your two runic attacks, your like summon things or whatever they were called, relics. You had like 3 or 4, maybe 5 like different things you could pop. It's been like over a month since I finished the game, so I forget all the specifics. But yeah, like
Well, you got 3 weapons, and then you got 2
yes.
runic attacks for each weapon, a light attack and a heavy attack. So if you're full up when you pop an encounter,
Yep.
it's like 1,
Yeah.
2, 3.
Yeah,
4,
I would basically
5,
just
6.
like on any fight where I wanted to really throw down, I would just start off the fight, pop in every single thing for every single weapon, and that would almost end the fight right there.
Mm-hmm.
Which feels like a weird way to play the game. It's like, I don't know if that's a way they really intended people to play, because it feels more like you're just juggling abilities than like actually participating in the combat.
It's the exact same thing that I did. Just juggle all the abilities, and it took me a while to a couple of hours of in-game time for the to just remember that I had a runic summon on hold square. So like really it was like 7 things, and I'm probably forgetting something else, but like that's what kind of made it difficult for me in this game sometimes, is like I'm looking at the armor for the stats, I'm looking at my play style. So if I'm trying to maximize stuff for runic attacks, like I never felt like I found the armor that I was really looking for my play style. And that was probably just because I just missed it. Like I didn't go through the game with a fine tooth comb. I didn't like 100% complete it. But I think I finished out the game with the dragon scale armor set, which was just granted some buffs to blocks and parries. Because I felt like by the end of the game, you were doing a lot of blocking and parrying because you had to. But that was one of my complaints with this game, which was my same complaint for the 2018, is that it felt a lot of times overwhelming for me to really know what I should be prioritizing for stats or for sets or things like that. And the game doesn't do a great job of kind of walking you through that, other than like some codex, entries and some help menus and things like that. And maybe that's just me getting older as a gamer. I don't want to go through the number of screens that this game is asking me to go through for upgrading all of this stuff. You have XP that you use on your skill trees, but then you have XP that you use to upgrade your runic summons, I think, and then you can use it in another spot but like I didn't find some of that stuff out until I was like halfway through the game. And I didn't even really need to engage with that system, though. It wasn't like I'd hit a wall and then I like went into my, inventory and went, oh, I'm still using my level 1 cracked sash, right? Like it's not that was causing me to like hit a gameplay wall, but it felt a little more streamlined with this one in some cases. I didn't really engage with the gem system too much in the 2018 God of War, but still overall I felt like for me to really dig into these systems, I would have had to sit down with an external guide from somewhere on the internet, right, and just kind of go through it that way. And I you can certainly do that, but I don't know that I like having to consult an external source to really have what I'm looking for, like what I'm looking at, it explained to me, if that makes sense.
I think the way that I ended up going with it, Paul, was there was a did you see that you saw the Raven gear? If you killed the Ravens,
Yes.
you unlock these chests. There was a leg piece and an arm piece, and if you had both of them, then all healing would heal you for 30% more. Then there's a chest piece that you can get by using the mysterious artifact on those giant statues. You can end up crafting this armor, and it says whenever you get low on health, it triggers this a couple seconds of you gaining health on hit. But it actually seems like almost anytime you get hit kind of hard, it triggers that ability for you to maybe get 5-10 seconds of health leeching. And so I was once I got that build together, I was kind of indestructible. Now I still wasn't doing shit damage to any of the enemies, but they couldn't touch me. So
Yeah, and
that was
and
the
like
way
that's
I
cool.
rolled.
Like and I just wish some of that stuff would have been a little more obvious at the outset. But again, I'm making that a very light criticism because I know that that's also partly on me too to actually go through and engage with those systems and to do some of the digging around with the Ravens, like you're talking about, Will, and getting in those crafting menus. Like that's on me as a player. It's just I don't know that they made it as simple as I would have liked. So.
Yeah, I think. Go ahead, Will.
I mean,
Yeah, I think that
go ahead,
cuts
go ahead,
both
Flex.
ways to some degree. It's like, I think, yes, if you dug into it and and especially if you did like all the side quests and collectibles and had all the gear options at your fingertips, and I think if you really went in and like did all the work yourself, like I think there are some varied options there and like ways to build a character to play. Will was talking about a build where you get healing, and Nate was talking about poison fisticuffs, and there are different ways you can play. I think also the game does kind of a poor job at explaining what, like, really giving you a good sense of what all those different stats mean, and also kind of presenting like clear ways to build a character that will play very differently. I think a lot of like this is primarily an action game, and you have what, like 6, 7, 8 stats. Like, you have a good number of stats, and like how much does it really matter if I equip this gear that has 10 cooldown and 5 runic versus this other one that has 10 runic and 5 cooldown? Like, there's just not really a great sense of like what these stats really mean. I actually stuck with the belt and the bracers from very early in the game. They were like something of might or strength, and it was just like earlier in the game you get like one set that's more strength than defense and another set that's more defense and strength, and I had equipped the strength set from the start of the game and kept it the entire game because I'm like, I just want to kill stuff faster. And like, honestly, I don't know if it made much of a difference. Like, I couldn't really tell if I was really stronger and killing stuff faster. So like, I think those numbers are just kind of mushy and don't really, the game doesn't, if they matter. Like, I played through the whole game and I couldn't tell you how much those numbers matter. Like, I'm sure they do matter, but how much, I don't really know.
Yeah, I will say, and I really don't think it was that easy to get the set that I actually ended up getting. I mean, I was happy with it. I thought it worked for what I was wanting to do, but essentially the the way that you got the armor, two of the armor pieces, was by killing the random ravens, and some of them are very, very well hidden in the game. I mean, some of them it's like you have to look from a very specific angle. Sometimes you have to like throw your axe and like catch them in midair. It can be hard. Now, to get the two pieces, that's the second chest. So that's all, and there's something like 6 chests. So I mean, you don't have to kill tons of ravens to get them, but you do have to start killing the ravens. Now, the chess piece that I got, you had to find what they called a mysterious heirloom, which ended up being the relic thing that you could activate. And it says that it does nothing. But essentially, you have to go and find these giant statues and have the wherewithal to use the relic while you're standing in front of the giant statue, and it wakes the giant up, and then you can kill him. Once you kill him, you get a certain type of drop. You take that to Brock and Sindri, and he's like, "Hey, I can do something with that." But I really don't know. I mean, did any of you guys actually kill any of the giants? Did you know that that was a thing you could do with the
No,
mysterious
everything you're
heirloom
saying
that
is
you
news to
found?
me.
Right. So this is kind of an issue, right? I mean, if we're trying to get in the weeds with the system, but
Yeah,
anyway, I don't know.
it's I'm of two minds of that kind of stuff because it's like, oh, it's kind of cool that like, oh, if you like pay attention and dig in and do that work, you can get a cool piece of gear. At the same time,
If by pay attention you
yeah,
mean look it up on the internet, because I mean,
yeah,
that's kind of the way I did it. I mean, I didn't look up a build, but I definitely looked up like what are all the armor pieces
yeah.
and where can
At
I
the
get
same
them?
time, I feel
You
like
know?
just so much of this game is like straightforward action blockbuster. You know, this isn't like this isn't really a game about figuring stuff out. I feel I feel like at least how it presents itself, and so it's kind of a weird, an odd dichotomy to me. Um, so yeah, I'm kind of of two minds. It's like I'm glad there is good, like interesting gear for people who do manage to jump through all those hoops. But for me, as someone who basically just stuck to the critical path, it's like I don't feel like I found any gear that made much of a difference. Um,
Yeah, and I agree with you about the stats. I still don't know. Like, it's like, oh, I got 2 more luck because I found the dewdrop. I don't know. I mean,
yeah,
that
I
sounds
do
good.
think,
You know.
and uh, Nate, feel free to jump in here about we've been talking about stats at any point. I do think that they've made the gear system a little smoother than in 2018 because I absolutely hated the arbitrary level cutoffs from 2018, and where if an enemy was 2 or 3 levels higher than you, then you basically, it was impossible to beat them. And as far as I can tell, it's not that strict in this game. I think they do scale and they are harder, but it's not such a binary you can beat them versus they are impossible to beat. It's more gradual. So I do appreciate I do
Yeah.
appreciate that
Yeah,
they smooth that out
much
some.
better.
I'm not 100% sure if it was a system change um, that made that system work better in terms of your gear level versus enemy levels, or if it was a change in the order things are presented to you. I'm not 100% sure, but I never encountered an enemy that would one-shot me through a block and I could do no damage to because they were too
Yeah,
high level for me,
yeah,
which happened all the time in the first game to the point of or not the first game, the previous game, all the time in that game to the point where where I stopped doing any side content or going off the beaten path at all in that game because I kept running into these complete roadblocks because of gear score, and it completely
yeah,
took me out of any of the RPG aspects, doing any side content in that game. And this game, the complete 180 in terms of my experience, being able to do and enjoy that stuff as it was presented to me.
yeah. You kept yanking Valkyries out of portals, and
Right.
you're like,
So I
"Whoops, I
don't
didn't mean to
know
walk into
100%
that."
if it's a different
But I
system
mean,
or if
yeah,
they just built the world and the order of content much smarter to make that smoother.
Yeah, whatever
yeah. Yeah, and there's definitely the Gale stuff, like there are a lot of areas in the game that are
Yeah.
gated by those spears that you get. And I'm wondering if
Right.
some of the higher level content really they're like, well, you want to be at least this high before you start tackling the dragons and the giant earth shaker beasts
yeah.
or whatever. You know what I mean?
That's a good transition to I got three other kind of mechanical topics questions to ask. Individually, probably all fairly quick. So, and transition to the first one of those is what we'll mention, the spear. So this game does introduce a new weapon in the spear. I forget what the full name of the weapon is, but um, how
Dropnir.
Near.
Draupnir.
Draupnir,
I'll go with that.
It's such a
something like
cool
that.
concept.
Yeah, well, I mean, what did you all think of the spear as adding a third weapon to the arsenal?
I liked it. I really did.
Yeah,
I think I liked it conceptually more than I liked it functionally. I thought it was a great foil for Heimdall, but then when I actually started to use it against other guys, it was just kind of like, well, here we are again,
One of
doing
its
the
runic
same shit.
attacks where you throw it in the air, then a whole bunch of spears would come down, and then you could blow all the spears up when you hold triangle. Like, that was probably the most satisfying opening 4 seconds to every combat, because I did it every time, and it was just so satisfying. But, yeah,
And these enemies are like, dude, I'm gonna totally miss that 1/4 of a
well,
half of my health bar
it
that you
looked
took
cool,
away
and it
doing
made
that
me
whole
feel
thing.
good. It was not effective, but it made me feel good.
so
The thing that I
yeah,
really liked about the spear that made it actually probably my preferred weapon of the three, although I mostly went barehanded. Um, when I did pull out a weapon, I preferred the spear over the other two. It was just how quick it is and how you could pepper in those extra explosions to keep the pressure on enemies. Like that was really satisfying to me. Like the axe is fun, but it's pretty slow. And then the chains are really good for like crowd control, area of effect attacks. And the spear felt like what I really wanted, which was like ability to just like focus down and really hound one enemy and keep them on their heels because my attacks come out quick. They have a little bit of reach to them, and then I can stick little explosive spears in them for later and just pop them when it suits me.
yeah, I was about to say I think the spear ended up being my favorite of the three weapons, and primarily it was speed, and I kind of griped about 2018 God of War at the time because I what you said, it's slow. I found the axe too slow. Like throwing the axe is fun. Using any of its like more powerful abilities or in melee, I think it's just too slow, and I would get hit trying to do very basic actions a lot. The spear, I liked how quick it was, and I also think it like in combat it might be my favorite ranged weapon because like throwing it I found to be pretty powerful. And then you get those extra little explosions that can disrupt enemies at a time of your choosing. Um, like if they
The
started charging you, you could
charge up
disrupt.
throw is really good for just knocking dudes off cliffs and
Mhm.
all kinds
I
of fun stuff.
Yeah, I found myself fighting at range actually in this game a lot, and the spear was just really good for that. Um, any other?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I mean, when I talked to Tim, friend of the podcast, not a member, um, he did all ranged as well, and so he was trying to tell me to do all this range stuff. And I think this game, for some reason, I was like, I'm gonna do the parry thing, and so I was always in there mixing it up, because I just wanted to try it. And I think there was a shield attachment that you got later that increased the parry window so that it was that much easier to do it. And I remember kind of being being really excited when I got that. So it did mean that I got my ass handed to me a lot, but I did some real exciting parries and stuff in there. But I didn't spend much time at range, I guess, unless I was fighting something that I had to kind of deal with who was
Yeah,
flying,
I will
something like
absolutely
that.
say that one of the easiest ways for a game to make me have fun with the combat is to make the parries feel good. To put a good parry in there, and I'm like, oh yeah. And this game does that, which the previous one did too.
So if there's no more comments on the spear, another quick-ish question is how much collectibles stuff did you guys do? Like what was kind of your play style? Did you stick? So I mostly stuck to the critical path. But if you'll allow me, I did find a list of collectibles. Um, I will read
Here we go.
through them
We'll allow
for
it.
both our and the audience's amusement.
Let's do it.
God of War Ragnarok contains 418 collectibles.
Nice.
There are 47 favors, which are your side quests, 38 artifacts, 80 bits of lore, 48 of Odin's ravens, 35 Nornir chests, 53 legendary chests, 15 Yggdrasil rifts, 10 Berserker gravestones, 6 Draugr holes, 10 remnants of Asgard, 6 Hell tears, 9 realms and bloomflowers, 6 lindworms, 4 stags of all seasons, 15 Muspelheim trials, 10 buried treasures or treasure maps, 14 relics or hilts, 5 shields, and 9 jewels of Yggdrasil. How much of all that did you guys do?
Doesn't include all the weapons and armors and stuff too. Just gonna say that,
Yeah,
and then you'll talk and come back to me.
Yeah, I did a fair amount of that actually. I think the main things that I didn't do were the Berserker gravestones because I already felt like I was doing shit damage to everything because I didn't have the Poison Fist secret, the secret of the Poison Fist, as it were. And so I was like, I do not want to tussle with these Berserkers. I think I tried one of them and just got absolutely stomped on. And then, of course, Groa, not Groa, but whatever the Valkyrie's name at the end, I didn't touch that thing because apparently that thing is even more beefy than the Berserkers. I didn't do all of the Muspelheim trials, but I did do like the first 6 or so. But yeah, I did a fair chunk of it, and a lot of it wasn't. It didn't feel too hard. I did wait until I kind of had all the equipment that I wanted to have before I started going back and doing that stuff. The dumbest thing I did, but also I felt like I needed to do it, was I actually killed all of the ravens. And there was this boss called the Raven Queen that you fight because the Raven Queen is super upset that you've killed all these ravens. And there was a heavy runic attack for your axe and for your blades that you could get out of the chests in that realm where you have where the ravens went after you took them out. And I was really interested in seeing what those were. So that was the biggest. It was rewarding, but it also felt like a stupid waste of time.
Yeah, I didn't do quite as much as Will did. I feel like I probably did about half of the stuff that was listed. So like there were a couple of areas that I definitely spent a lot of extra time in. I didn't do anything in Muspelheim. I'll start with that. But I spent a lot of time in Midgard, and I spent a lot of time in Vanaheim, covering a lot of the side quests there that had a bunch of Freya's backstory in it, because I thought that they did a good job with her character, which we'll get to in the next segment. But it was one of those where I didn't really feel the need to go through and find a lot of this stuff. I fought one Berserker, and then I turned the game difficulty all the way down, and then I turned the mid-boss checkpointing on just to see if I could kill it with every single assist turned on in the game. Yeah, no, that didn't happen, so I just left all of those other Berserker gravestones alone. But no, that one area that opened up in Vanaheim, the crater, there's a lot of extra stuff there. I spent a lot of time there, and I did spend a lot of time in Midgard, but I'd say probably about half of most of that. I don't think I got all the Draugr holes. I think I only got 5, and I was gonna try and get the 6th one because I wanted to see what that would unlock for the Blades of Chaos. But I don't know that I ever found that last one.
It's just another full stone.
Okay.
Just give you one extra stone to upgrade it. That's all it would give you. Yeah.
What about you, Nate? What did you do with side stuff and collectibles?
So I started not sure what I was going to do with the side stuff because, like I said in the previous game, I was really turned off by the gear system and how the side content was. So I just kind of started it with an open, not sure what I was going to do, if I was just going to mainline it or not. Started just poking into the side quests as they popped up and completing them, and that was all pretty straightforward and easy, mostly finding stuff as I was going through. And then I guess I'll just have to share a couple of things here in the chat. I don't know what happened, but I ended up 100%ing the stupid game.
Nate has shared a picture of him with a platinum trophy for God of War Ragnarok.
My God. You legend.
The thing is, none of it's hard. It's just time consuming.
Did you use a guide to get the
So
ravens,
when
or
I
did you
got to
just
the
find
very
them?
end and I saw how little I had missed, I did look up a guide for like last 10 things I had not found as I was going through. Just so I didn't spend any time looking for them.
Gotcha.
So I definitely did not do that without a guide. That would have taken way longer.
And the game does break down like by area what your percentage of
Yeah.
what's missing in that area. So I mean, it definitely wants you to find all the things and kind of points you where the things you're missing are. But even with that, some of the things are probably really like needle in a haystack almost.
Yeah, especially the ravens. They're pretty hidden. So I think the main reason I ended up doing all of those collectibles that you read out earlier is because like on that map, so clearly delineated, like in this area, there's 2 Nornir chests and 3 ravens and 1 whatever else, and so like every time I was leaving an area, I was just like, well, let me see how my checklist is looking, and then I would go try to find the things that I had missed. Because I was just doing it piecemeal, like one area at a time, it just kind of ended up being where I had almost things by the end, and then I just went and looked up the things I didn't have. Definitely the most tedious thing was the Muspelheim trials, which took forever.
Yeah, my question was going to be, was it worth it?
I don't know. I mean, I had fun. There was not really any point where I was felt like I was just doing something I wasn't enjoying, or else I wouldn't have done it. So like overall, I had a pretty good amount of fun with this 50 hours I spent doing 100% run of this game. That's where I ended up.
Nice.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I'm proud of you.
And all the berserkers are fine once you just adopt the way of the poison fist.
See?
Have to give that a
Just a
shot.
trick.
Yeah, so the most tedious thing sounds like were Muspelheim, which I didn't even attempt them because I found them tedious in the 2018 game. So I assumed they would be here as well.
Yeah, they were just time consuming. None of them were hard.
Well, not with the
some
poison
of them. Some of them were just long, and then if you did happen to fail them, it was just long to redo it. And then the final set of challenges, you have to like redo the previous set of challenges in different orders to unlock different challenges for the final set. And that part was the one part where I was like, I don't know if I want to do this, but it was like one of the last things that I had, so I was just like, I'm just going to power through.
That's how they get you.
That's how they get you 100%, because every area you get that checklist, and it's like, well, you're only missing 2 things. You're just gonna walk away when you're missing 2 things, and I'm like, no, of course not. What am I, a chump?
I was a chump. I walked away before I even started.
That's the real way to win. To just not do any of it. If you've done like 80% of it, you have a decision to make.
Yeah.
I don't know if I made the right decision or not, but I enjoyed it.
It sounds. I mean, to me, it sounds like it was worth it. It sounds like you enjoyed it. All right, last mechanical thing before we shift to dig into the meat of the story, which this is maybe kind of a transition as well. You spend a good chunk of this game not playing as Kratos. You spend a good chunk of this game playing as young Atreus. How did you guys like playing and fighting as Atreus?
I didn't mind. It wasn't my favorite, right? But I was expecting much worse than what I got. What I got was a 5 out of 10, 6 out of 10. Some of my favorite interactions were between Atreus and some of those characters that he was with when you were playing as him. So like some of those story beats really kind of softened the actual, gameplay sort of drop off for me. But I was expecting to hate it, and then it was just fine. I don't know that I would play an entire game with how few mechanics Atreus has compared to the rest of the cast, but for the sections that you played as him, for the length of those, It was okay. I didn't dread it when they gave me another Atreus section. I was like, okay, another one of these. I wasn't excited, but I didn't like want to put the controller down. It was just like, all right, this is 20 minutes of me going, hiat hiat, and then do a kick, and then an arrow to the sky, and then. But it's only 20 minutes. I can just kind of power through this and be fine with it.
Well, it was only 20 minutes until it wasn't, and I think my least favorite parts of the game, like I pretty much agree with you that like fighting with Atreus was fine. It wasn't as he didn't have as many options as Kratos, which it was not as interesting, but for the most part, it was fine. But there were a couple chapters where you played as Atreus that just went on very long, and in those moments, that's when I was like, yeah, playing as Atreus, I want to be Kratos again. I want to have all the tools. I want to have all the things. Um, the one chapter, and this dragged for story reasons too, but the one chapter that really like was like, oh man, I don't know about this game was the chapter where you meet uh Angerboda, is that her name?
Yeah,
Yep.
Angerboda.
Yeah, you meet her,
Jotunheim.
and that chapter's like a 2+ hour like
Yeah.
teens hanging out, just doing whatever kind of chapter, and I was like, all right, let's get this moving. Like I
Really
like
that long?
it was.
My
It
question
felt
was
like
like,
one of the longest chapters in the game, missions in the game, and
It was pretty long compared to the other sections, and you had those slow ox rides through the
yeah,
swamp, and like,
forgot about that.
Yeah, you're on that
Right.
ox,
and then
and
the
he's
whole
really taking his
detour
time.
with Angerboda's grandma and that fight that basically had no relevance to the rest of the game or story. So like, I get it. That section dragged for sure.
yeah, and like I like Angerboda and I like her place in the story, but like that that chapter could have been cut down a little bit, and I think that's really the only time I didn't like playing Atreus is when his section went on a little too long. I think as long as they kept it tight, it was a fine enough like diversion from Kratos, but yeah, fighting with him was just not as fun as Kratos to me.
I was always kind of irritated when I had to fight with Atreus. And I mean, overall, I mean, I did like this game, but yeah, those sections. And I think part of it is because, I had all these things I was trying to put together. Just like Nate was trying to put together his poison build. At first, I was trying to put together this sort of build where I caught the enemies on fire, and I was looking forward to getting certain items and upgrading certain items, and then it was sort of like my momentum would just get sort of quashed, and then I'm in here hanging out with Atreus, and he doesn't have he doesn't have the depth of options that Kratos did, and it didn't really seem like it was worth trying to put together anything. Well, this is what I'm going to do with my Atreus. It's almost like, well, there's just one kind of thing to do with Atreus, or at least it kind of felt that
Atreus
way to
didn't
me.
have the poison fists.
I feel like I mostly echo what you guys have already said, that it was fine but not amazing mechanically. I feel like it was a little bit of like mechanical padding in a way, make the game feel bigger than it is, like in terms of what you're doing. So you're not just fighting enemies as Kratos the whole game. I do think like narratively it makes perfect sense that they made the choice to switch perspectives back and forth. The game would lose a lot if they didn't do that. Yeah, otherwise
Yeah.
pretty unremarkable to play as him comparatively.
Yeah, so I think with this we will pivot to the narrative stuff. For like the setup of the world and the characters, like a lot of these characters were introduced in God of War 2018. Even the characters that we didn't really see much in 2018, they were talked about a lot, and I'm thinking of characters like Thor and Odin, and especially Tyr. Um, he was talked about frequently in 2018, but we actually meet him pretty early in this game, and
Well, sort of.
Well, sort of, yes. For the time being, I will refer to him as Tyr.
Yeah.
And Angerboda is maybe one of the few truly new characters. And also Thor's daughter, what was her name?
Rude.
Thrud.
Thrud, yes, Thrud. So they were two fully new characters that weren't really even mentioned in the previous one that I remember at least. Yeah, and I mean, from my part, I like most of the characters in this, pretty much all the characters in this game actually. Freya has multiple turns, which maybe we can get to a later story point. But I mean, she was a major character in the previous game as well. Tyr they finally found. Angerboda I think was a really strong new character. Maybe we'll just go around the room and like if everyone wants to shout out one character that they I don't know, either really appreciate or didn't like for some reason. You just want to give a character a shout out, maybe we'll start with that. Uh, if anyone has someone they want to shout out, feel free to jump in.
Sure. I think that they did an absolutely incredible job of making
Yeah.
you fucking hate Heimdall. And that,
Yeah.
I
They
think
lay it
they
on
just
thick.
nailed
Yeah.
it. And it really, yeah. And so, I mean, he's not a character that I loved at all, but certainly, I think he was excellent at doing what he was in the
He
game to
was
do.
such a despicable dirtbag.
And I don't know, like I feel like that with him, they could have very easily crossed the line to where you would have just kind of dismissed him because he's too over the top. No, like they did a good job of making me hate him, but not also making me like dismiss him, outright as like a cartoon character. Um, I I think at least for me, the the thing that I appreciated the most was all the interactions between Freya and Kratos. I mean, I know that there was a lot of that in the game, so I'm not trying to, call out that entire part, but there's a lot of parallels between Freya and Kratos from his previous incarnation in the other God of War series, with how she's blinded by her rage and her anger, and in a lot of ways, like it's not that Kratos like plays therapist; it's more that he's just kind of like he's just there, and he listens. He doesn't back down on some of the stuff that he did in the past, like killing Baldur at the end of the last game, but. But he did tell her, hey, I was wrong. I don't regret what I did, but I was wrong. But if you follow this path, it will destroy you. And like a lot of their interactions, I really appreciated. And I was curious if Freya would even be a character beyond the first 15 minutes of this game, because I figured we'd have like one of those boss fights at the very start of the game, like we always do with these. And in this game, it was Thor. Part of me was expecting your first boss fight to be Freya, and you just kill her and that would be the end of her entire character. I'm glad that they didn't do that. I was surprised with how strong of a character she was, and I was also surprised with how well her and Kratos interacted all the way through from she was trying to kill him still at the beginning of this game, all the way to, being a comrade by the end, and it felt fairly organic to me from start to finish.
Yeah, and I like what you said about how she's almost like parallel of a past Kratos or a different incarnation of Kratos and reflects something about him, because I think a lot of the gods do that. Or I think I felt a lot of times like, oh, this is just a different version of Kratos who never escaped bondage to Ares in the original trilogy and was just like a god's lapdog who runs around killing things because he was told to. Or Tyr being almost like the version of Tyr that we see, almost like the extreme, I don't want to engage, I don't want to be a part of this version of Kratos that we see a lot in this story specifically. So I think there's a lot of good like mirroring of different aspects of who Kratos is and him engaging with those and kind of seeing different paths he could take and having to choose how he interacts with those people. And often he does it in such a weirdly calm and compassionate way for what we think of as Kratos. And like it works. I mean, it just works.
Yeah, this is a good shout out because I think there's a whole lot we could dig into with Freya and Kratos specifically. And honestly, some of my favorite dialogue in the game was when you were on missions with Freya, and then of course Mimir's with you, and you would have dialogue with those three, kind of reminiscing about Kratos's past. And part of me enjoys that because it's like, oh yeah, I remember doing that in God of War 2 or whichever game they were talking about at the time. So I mean, there's kind of a fun throwback aspect to that, but also like I like one of the most interesting arcs to me of this game is thinking about how Kratos has changed from those games and like him as a character. And I'm not sure they earn quite all of it. Some of it feels like it happens kind of quick, or it's stuff that happened between God of War 3 and 2018 that we just didn't see and they don't really fill in. But I still think character or Kratos's like character path, journey, whatever, is super interesting. And I think you get the best dialogue around that when he's with Freya. I think Freya pulls that out of him and kind of provides that mirror, like Nate was saying. I do think Freya's turn from wanting to murder Kratos to being his best bud is kind of quick. I think that's a good arc for Freya, but I don't think they quite nailed that transition. That was actually kind of one of my bummer story arcs of the game is like I like on paper what it is, but I feel like the execution could have been handled better.
So what made that execution better for me, which is like probably a pacing thing that the game could have done better with, is the first time Atreus leaves and Freya joins your party, right? That's the first time that you have her there. That was probably when I did about half of all the side stuff that I would eventually end up doing in the entire game. So taking her through all the extra stuff in Alfheim and taking her through all the extra stuff in Vanaheim, where you could get to her side quest there with, her sword and all of that other stuff, like that made it feel more organic for me. But the game didn't force you to do that, right? Like you could have just kind of blitzed through some of that, and then that turn, I could definitely see it feeling like it would have been a bit rushed. But the way that I did it, it did feel more organic. But that was not because I knew what I was doing. That was just my choice for what I was sitting down to play that particular night. And I think that they probably could have done a better job there.
Yeah, I did similar amount of like a lot of side quests with her, and I agree that did help build a little bit of a relationship between Kratos and Freya on that quest. But I still feel like the start of that section was abrupt. She had been just hounding the two of them since the previous game, and then shows up at one point, and you don't see. I guess my issue was that I didn't feel like we saw the process where she went from hunting them and attacking them on sight to seeking them out for Kratos' help with a specific problem. Didn't see what caused that shift in her mind. She just showed up and said, "Hey, I need your help." And then it was like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah. And I feel like they were trying to play this like enemy of my enemy is my friend bit, but just the sheer level of rage she had for like her whole character at the start of this game was Kratos kills my son, I must kill him. Like that was her entire existence. So it just feels like I could see how they could make that transition happen, but yeah, I feel as someone who didn't do side quests and just stuck to the critical path through that part of the game, it felt very quick to me. You got a kind of character shout out you want to give, Nate?
I feel like we've shouted out most of my favorites. I did really like Angerboda, and I really liked, as weird as it is, I liked the inclusion of how the World Serpent and Fenrir came to be in their Ragnarok forms, and how that kind of ties back into the actual like Norse mythology behind it, and like I liked that part of it a lot. And so at both times, every time those two big monsters showed up, I was like, yeah, you're cool.
Yeah.
I like you.
Yeah, I will say is kind of a high level thing. I think they do a great job at, we'll get to these comparisons later, but I think this is probably the single thing that I think these games do better than the original trilogy is the way they incorporate the mythology into the actual story beats. I think in this game is really well done. And those characters, like you said, of like how does Fenrir come to be and like all of those
Yeah.
things.
Super cool. I think they missed a few steps that I was kind of bummed about, but those two specifically, I was like, yeah, this is rad.
Yeah, the Garm moment is pretty much my mouth was just hanging open the whole time. I think that was probably my favorite
Yeah.
moment in the whole game. I did want to just mention that Brock is fucking hysterical, and every once in a while he'll hit you with one of these lines, and you're like, good God, Brock, you got it going on, you know. Like, I mean, he a lot of times he's like, you know, just basic grumple man. But then every once in a while he'll hit you with one of these lines that really, oh God, I wish I could remember some of them now. But you know, I just want to
Both
give
Brock and
Brock a
Sindri
shout
are
out.
great. And
I
actually,
love
if I had to rank every character in the game and how much I like them, my top pick might actually be completely unhinged Sindri at the end of the game.
in
He is
in-game
great.
in-game Sindri is incredible.
Top tier.
He took his gloves off.
He took his gloves
The
off and
germaphobe took his gloves off.
he blew down the wall of Asgard.
Yeah.
I really feel like that if there is an Atreus spinoff game, well, you know, like if that ever happens, like Sindri was unhinged enough that I wouldn't be surprised if he's like the big bad of like an Atreus spinoff game. I mean, he was out there in a way where I'm like, I don't know that I want you here at Ragnarok. Like you're making Ragnarok unsafe, and that's saying something. Like, you know,
Yeah, no, Sindri's
I don't know. I kind of hated him, but especially at the end. But I don't know. I know I diverge from the masses on
in-game
that.
Sindri is great. I mean, I like Brock too. Brock is like he's like your old dirty mouth uncle, like potty mouth uncle who just like says crass things all the time, and like 90% of the time you're just like, yeah, whatever, man. But then like every now and then, like you said, he gets that good line that like really gets you. It's just really funny. Um, So I think I'm going to shout out, which is also going to transition to a scene I want to talk about, which is one of the opening scenes of the game when Odin and Thor come to Kratos' house. Um, I was going to shout out Odin as a character and also Thor to a degree. I feel like they have a really interesting take on Odin in this game. He doesn't look like a strong, you know, he looks kind of just like an old frail man with an eye patch. Um, but Um, and I'm kind of I brought him up not because I love him necessarily. Like I think he's interesting, and I think there are times where he has like dialogue moments that are like really work really well, and he just feels menacing. I also, and I'm really curious to get you three's opinion on this. One thing I struggled with in this game, and this started right from that initial meeting when they come to Kratos' house, is I struggled with like we know Odin is bad. We know Odin has done bad things, but I struggled with like we haven't really seen much of it. Like Odin wasn't a presence in 2018, and right from the start of this game you can tell the game wants you to really think like Odin is this terrible monster that you should never agree to anything with, and he's always like trying to get one over on you and like always up to something. But to me, I
right?
don't know that I ever really felt that in my core. Like I didn't really feel that they kind of set him up that or built like actually showed him being like they never really showed him being bad or being that sly
Well,
manipulating weasel.
I
And
don't know.
you
Like,
get some of that. I'll caveat that by saying if you do like like in the couple side quests I did, which were all early game side quests, like one of them was like shutting down some like dwarven factories or something. Basically Odin had like done all this terrible stuff to the dwarves and like kind of enslaved them and like manipulated them into doing all these things and treated them poorly. So it's like I do get that you get some of that in like the side content, but in terms of the main critical path, I'm not sure for me they kind of built him up as this horrible monster that the game wanted you to think he is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, and I think the game did a great job of making you like really wonder if Odin's a bad guy. Like, you hear all this stuff, but then your personal interactions, you're like, wow, this guy's reasonable. And then he stabs Thor in the fucking throat and kills him, and then he goes and he throws Mjolnir at his granddaughter, and he's like that to me was what kind of sealed it, is he was kind of playing you, the player, the whole game, because that's what the game designers wanted to show you. Like, they wanted to show Odin being that duplicitous jackass, but you're like, well, he's not really doing anything. Well, then at the very end, to me, that's where it all came back together for me, is that he couldn't take that Thor wasn't going to just be a lapdog, and Thor was choosing to be better, and Odin then killed him for it. And then here comes his granddaughter, and he just wallops her with an axe or with Thor's hammer, and it's like, so those two actions combined with some of his dialogue about, like, you know, so and so made me do this, so and so made me kill Thor. You know, I didn't kill Thor. Thor killed Thor. It was just my hand that did it. Like that ending part there is what really sealed it to me, that no, Odin really is as bad as all the stuff has been telling us. We only saw that one particular little bit at the very end, but that's what confirmed all the rest of it to me.
Yeah, and I do think like that moment there definitely like veil off, like, you know, he is the comic book villain that, you know, Freya and everyone else has been saying he is the whole game, and Mimir, and you've heard some of these stories along the way. It did feel like earlier on there's a little disconnect from, like, the game clearly wanted you to think he was the clear bad guy, to me at least, because all your companions are saying as much. But yeah, I think maybe I could have just used something a little early game to like make me feel the way about Odin that Freya and Mimir and, you know, maybe Kratos himself. Kratos is mostly mute, so it's hard to really know what he thinks. But yeah,
I do think
something about that was a little odd to me. Go ahead, Nate.
I do think I overall like it the way that they did Odin, because I don't know how much of this is intentional, because I do think from the writing of the game, character dialogue and the side quests and all the lore, I think it's like 100% clear Odin is evil, he's a manipulator, he uses everybody, he only cares about himself, and like that is just on the page, bright, shiny, sparkly, like no contradiction ever raised to that like in what is written for the game. But I do think like something about his performance, the voice actor, his look, the way he just kind of does appear and like isn't just like showing up at the beginning and doing something really outwardly evil, is like just enough to make you be like, I don't know, maybe he's not as bad as they are all saying. I don't know. And I don't know how much of that is intentional, I guess, but I definitely got the feeling while I was playing the game of I'm understanding that this person is evil and bad, but like you said, I'm not seeing it as Kratos's and Atreus's perspective, and took that as, oh, it's because he's trying to manipulate me. He's not letting me see mask off evil side yet, because he's trying to get something from these characters, and by the time it all starts to fall apart and he realizes that's not going to work, you see how long he's been playing the puppet master as Tyr, and then immediately murders Brock, and like I feel like it all worked for me in that sense, like because he's not the villain who shows up and destroys your hometown because he's just evil. He he's playing a longer game.
Right. And I guess, and maybe the question I'm asking is from Kratos's
Well,
and Atreus's perspective. How did they know he's that manipulator?
Right.
And when I think to that initial conversation when they came to Kratos's house, the deal Odin was trying to make was, hey, I want Atreus to stop looking into Tyr, and if you do that, I'll leave you alone. Which on its face sounds like a good deal for everyone. Obviously, Odin's manipulative and all that. But from Kratos and Atreus's perspective, do they know enough about him at that point in time to know he's full of it? And
well, Kratos doesn't have a good track record of God.
But also, and then the other angle of this is, my understanding is Kratos also didn't want Atreus looking into Tyr. So, like, in a way, Kratos also wanted him to stop, regardless of what Odin was saying.
Yeah, but like you, the player, are in a
Yeah.
different headspace than the characters. The characters believe everything about Odin that they've heard in the previous game from Mimir and this and that and the other. For Odin, or sorry, for Kratos, there's no question that we're not going to do whatever Odin's asking for us to do because he's lying in some way, shape, or form. The answer is no. Unless he asked me to do something that I was already on my way to do. That might have been an interesting kind of thing. But like, I think that this game did a really good job of separating player knowledge, which is you, the person holding the controller, from the character knowledge. Like, we as the players are meant to think maybe this Odin guy is actually a pretty reasonable, and he's just gotten a bad rap from all of these other crazy people. I mean, Kratos did destroy an entire world, which is kind of a problem. But like, what we see is at the end is that no, Odin was that bad all along, and maybe Kratos, the character, had that figured out long before we did.
Well, I think I don't know. I think this is kind of going into the themes piece. Flex was talking earlier about the thesis of the game. There's this sort of fixation that both Atreus and Odin have on what's going to happen and can I stop it and I need to be in control. You know, And that's why I think it's such a pivotal moment when, Atreus says, I don't care, and he like breaks the mask. Because I think the idea is that, yeah, Odin I don't think he's like at a core some sort of like evil. I mean, I didn't get the feeling even at the end of the game that he was totally a monster, even at the end. My whole thing was if, basically his goal is to figure out what's going to happen to him and to have some degree of control over it, and anything that stands in the way of him learning that's when he's going to enact some sort of evil. So to me, that's kind of the feeling that I got. And of course, to some degree, Atreus is tempted by that as well. He's like, I want to know what's going to happen. I want some control over this. I don't want my dad to die. And the game is in some degree, to some degree sort of about, one, forging your own destiny, but two, you know, does that really matter? And of course, Angrboda does the same thing. She tries to throw in the towel as soon as she gets done doing what she's sort of predestined to do. She's like, well, this is it. This is my role. And then, of course, we come to like her a lot more and to see her play a major role in the story because she doesn't accept that that's where her story ends. So there's this whole prophecy thing, and it seems like really Odin, of all the characters, is the one who is the most wrapped up in the prophecy idea. And of course, Atreus moves in that direction for a moment, but I guess that's sort of where I see Odin's sort of, I guess, evil arc is sort of to that end, to that end of trying to figure out his.
I mean, that's
his
absolutely
fate
his
or prophecy.
motivation. I think that fact that he turns so easily to manipulation and his monstrous ends is like why we're supposed to hate him. Yeah, that is 100% it.
Yeah, and prophecy and fate and all that is definitely one of the major through line themes, theses, whatever, of this game. And I guess while we're here, just to make just to stick with it, maybe kind of jumble in the order here, but I think that's fine. what did you guys? What was your read on? Because we this whole game they're just talking about prophecies and like you can't change it and all this stuff and like, but characters do change it. So like, Angerboda for you just mentioned, and most obviously Atreus changes his fate. He was supposed to kill Kratos and join Odin by the prophecy, and he pretty much did the exact opposite in the end. Um, so like, do you guys have any like final takeaways about prophecy? And I guess while you're thinking about that, the other scene I was going to call out in the game that leads, before kind of the ending stretch. And this was one of my favorite scenes in the game and is all about prophecy, is you're with Freya and you go to visit, were they called the Fates or what were they called?
Norns.
The Norns, yeah. That mission where you go see the Norns. Um, and I really love the scene when you actually meet with the Norns. Um, because they're basically just like, we don't have any like we don't have any magical powers here. Y'all are just so predictable.
Yep.
It's like, this is not this ain't rocket science. Like you're just really easy to read. And they're basically like, to Kratos, they're basically like, yeah, you kill gods. Like that's just what you do. And it makes it easy to predict that you are going to kill more gods. Like you are going to go kill Heimdall right now. And he does. Um, and then, of course, there's all the stuff with Angerboda, showing Atreus the murals. And, there's all of this. There's so much of this, like, the prophecy is set in stone. You cannot change it. Like, that message is drilled into us for, like, 3/4 of this game. And then at the end, a lot of it changes. So, like, I guess do you guys have any read on, like, I don't know, like, way to make sense of that, or like, is it as simple as, oh, you don't have to listen to people who tell you have a fate, you can change whatever. Like that's to me kind of the surface level read, is that, yeah, these things that seem set in stone really aren't. Is it? Do you guys have kind of that surface level read, or do you have kind of more takeaways to that, or hopefully all of what I'm asking here makes sense.
Yeah.
I think to some degree, there are sort of self-fulfilling prophecies. Obviously, if you believe in prophecy, you may not be willing to act outside the bounds of it. I think also prophecies are very prone to being misread. I mean, I know that, when we were seeing some of these panels that Atreus found, we're like, okay, well, there's there's Kratos. He's got a lightning bolt beside him. Does that mean he's fighting Thor, or, and it's like, well, here's Tyr out here in the middle of stuff, and so I mean, I don't know if there's, I guess those are the two thoughts I have about prophecy. I mean, I know certainly, in my own life, I don't believe in prophecy, right? but I don't know. I guess those are the two thoughts I have about the subject, kind of in terms of takeaways. At the same time, the moment that actually made me shed a tear in the game is when Kratos looks at the back of that panel, that very final panel, and he sees people making offerings to him, after Odin had said, nobody's ever worshipped you and nobody will, because all you do is just cause death and destruction and murder everybody, and so the idea that he'd had enough of a character shift to perhaps for people to, give, pay him tribute, was enough to get me leaky. So I don't know, but in a way, that's prophecy. Here we are back looking at the panel
for sure.
again,
But
so.
that moment was great, and even though it kind of loops you back into the prophecy mindset, I think it still shows like Kratos' reaction to that was what made it so powerful. Even though it was just like his facial animation, they did it really well. I think that further cemented his journey to becoming a different person and having his sort of heart open to change and to new things that he would have never imagined in a previous life. I think in terms of like the idea of prophecy within this world and the story that this game presents, I think it probably is pretty consistent if you try to break it all down. That prophecy is just not given. Like, it's basically, I think, what the Norns say, right? Like, there is no such thing as real prophecy. It's just that people show their true selves, their intentions through their actions, and that kind of predicts what's going to happen in the future. And the sort of cynical, maybe slightly funny way to interpret that is like that Kratos is just the ultimate protagonist in every way in these games, and he always wins no matter what it is. And so, like, he's the one person who they couldn't quite predict that he was going to shift and decide to, instead of kill Thor at the end, have a heart-to-heart with him about how they need to be better for their kids, and that maybe is what made the difference, and the prophecy didn't go that way. You know, like, he's just that good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something you said, Will, about the murals can be like interpretations can be unreliable sometimes. Every single time they stepped into one of those doors and like they would see the images like acting out like kind of in space in front of them, and they would be pulling all this stuff from them. I'm like, how do you guys get that from that? It's like I they're like pulling all this stuff from just like very sparse imagery, and I'm like, man, you're really getting a lot out of that, huh?
Yep. Like the image of Ragnarok where they interpreted it as Tyr leading the armies to Ragnarok, which is why Atreus went to find Tyr at the beginning of this game, probably ended up, I think the intention there is that that was actually an image of Kratos holding near leading the armies to Ragnarok, and they just read it wrong.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know if that was, if like a lot of those were set up to like, yeah, we're just reading this wrong.
I assume so. I mean, that just seems like such a core part of prophecies.
Yeah, and I think a lot of, as I was reading this, Will said he didn't believe in prophecies in his own life, and I agree with that. I think a lot of times with games like this, I read it as like, this is a mythological world that has all sorts of magical things in it. So within the constructs of this world and this mythology, it is a very real thing. And maybe part of what they were trying to say is like, oh, even within that, no, it's like it doesn't fully apply.
Yeah, I think so. That's where I ended up with it. I think that prophecies have power because people give them power, kind of like what Will was saying, and they maybe are alluding to some amount of like gift of foresight by magical beings, but not necessarily set in stone. This is going to happen this way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I kind of derailed us to talk about one of the big topics I was going to talk about later, but that ended up being, I think, a natural place to talk about it. But I kind of want to open the floor, give all three of you a chance. I'll say I already took mine, but any kind of moment or scene or plot point or anything kind of leading up to um, we're kind of dubbing Brock's death as kind of the kicking off the end game. So anything up to that point that you want to give a shout out before we turn to the end game?
One thing that I thought was really interesting is, well, I guess I'll say a couple things. One, I thought the Weight of Chain side quest was really good, and to some degree, that's like that's like God of War at its best. That's the side quest where there's the giant sea creature that you basically unchain, who's being kind of like held into place in this sort of I don't know
Yeah,
what would you
Yeah.
call it, like a little
that's one of the
bay
like three
in
side
this little
quests I
bay
did.
area. Uh, I
Okay. Good to
Yeah,
know.
it was one of the best ones, so that was a good one to do. Also, I guess I think it's interesting to think about Derlin. Like he's kind of a side guy, but he also like he so they go to Derlin. They're like, "Hey man, where's Tyr?" And he's like, "Here's your violation," and he gave them directions to the Tyr that was essentially Odin. And so it's interesting to me to think about like how the mechanics of that. Is Derlin in fact kind of like Odin's little stooge? I mean, later you go and find a hammer for him, which seems to be kind of unrelated to everything, and he's like, "This hammer is like gives my people hope." But I don't know. There's a part of me that's kind of like, Derlin, you little asshole. Like, what were you doing? Like, so I was just curious, like, if Paul or Nate had any thoughts about Derlin or what they thought that was all about. Did he earnestly believe that was Tyr in there, or was he somehow kind of because he shows up later with Odin. They come on the scene together. So I don't know. I was just kind of like, Derlin's a
Yeah,
little
I feel
slime
like
ball,
that
maybe.
there was something that like tickled the back of my brain while you were talking. It's been too long since I played now, but I feel like that at some point I had decided that Derlin was actually on Odin's side, and that everything that you were doing with him, he was just sort of like having you run around for funsies. But not that he was trying to get you killed, but just sort of a delay kind of thing. And then whenever we got to Ragnarok, which I know we're going to get to, and then none of the dwarves showed up. Like part of me kind of wondered at that point was how much of that was Sindri and how much of that was Derlin,
That's a good point.
So
I had
I
forgotten
thought
about that.
Derlin was kind of shady, but I would need to go back through some of that dialogue to make a more cogent argument than just like I didn't like him.
I honestly never thought about it. I thought Derlin was just kind of a random side character who popped in here and there and didn't really think about him at all. But you've convinced me. I think he's a bad dude. I think he's a double agent.
Yeah. I mean, along those lines, do you think the real Tyr is actually in the world, or you think he's been dead?
There,
He is in a post game
Oh,
side
he
thing.
is. He is.
Oh, okay. That I didn't see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So do you actually find real Tyr?
Yeah, you
yeah, he's
can.
alive.
Oh, okay.
He's just
Yeah.
walking around the world.
Yeah. I think Derlin needs to
Yeah, I
be
think so. I
introduced
think
to the
so.
Poison Fist.
I think I need to go
That's what
pay
I
him a
think.
visit.
That's some good detective work there, Will.
But yes, you can go find Tyr in a prison in one of the ruins of Asgard after the game ends in a post-game thing, and then you break him out, and he goes to all the 9 realms and does yoga.
Yep,
Perfect.
that's it.
That's
So
it. That's
he's
the
still a
whole.
pacifist. All right, cool.
The only other thing I really wanted to bring up is the I had it and I lost it. You're gonna have to edit that one. Sorry.
It's stuck here.
Oh no.
While Paul's thinking, you got anything, Nate?
I think we covered most of the big moments that I really liked. Garm and the Norns and Angerboda. Um, we could probably talk a long time about any of those things, but
Yeah, there's
I think
certainly a lot of things we could dig into in all of these.
for sort of the kind of space we're talking about and like story events and story progression, I think my main takeaway is like I think this game is made up of a lot of good scenes and good events. Then it's like strung together with a lot, and like kind of feels like I don't know. I guess a lot of times in the game I would stop and think like, what? Like, what is the plot of this like whole structure that I'm working through right now? Like, I had to like go back and remind myself like, what even instigated all this? What are we trying to do? Like, why are we here doing this thing? And like it always felt very loosey goosey to me as like a structure, as like a narrative structure, even though it's punctuated with like really well written and well realized characters. and like them acting in ways in specific scenes that makes a lot of sense and is really compelling. Like, I don't know if that makes sense the way I'm saying it. Like the narrative structure of it just always felt kind of like, I don't know, I guess let's go here and we'll do something, and then like cool stuff happens while they're there.
Yeah, I was struck by this. I actually have a note about this exact point that I didn't know if we were going to get to it, but I was struck by this as well when I was playing, is characters make decisions very quickly, like almost like they don't even like it's like someone will propose an idea is like, oh, I wonder if we could do this, and like as they're finishing their sentence, like Kratos is picking up his axe and starting to turn towards the door, and like, all right, we're gonna go do this, and like half the time it's just like going to get a MacGuffin that might help, but we don't actually know for sure. And it's like these things is just kind of like string together rapid fire because they're making decisions so quickly. And then, as you said, stuff like they make the decision quickly, and it turns into like a hour and a half long mission where a lot of stuff happens. So, you know, in
Right.
that sense, it doesn't move quickly, and I actually think this game could use a lot of editing and could get cleaned up some. But yeah, there's something about just the way they make decisions that I also found myself being like, why are we here again? It's like they didn't
Mhm.
quite fully think or reason through why they're going to go do this thing. It was just kind of like a snap decision that when you think about it later, like was kind of easy to miss or hard to really see why they did that.
Yeah, it's kind
Um,
of like what we were talking about earlier with Freya. She just kind of shows up, is like, Kratos, I need your help, and then you get the backstory about why she needs your help, but that happens so fast, and then like you go on a quest with her and it's good, and like they have really good interactions, and I like a lot of the stuff that happens there, but like, yeah, you're right, like the instigation of each piece of the game feels, I don't know, kind of weird.
mhm. You remember what you wanted to bring up, Paul?
Yeah, the scene where you actually get Draupnir forged, going down and finding that the blacksmith is actually a mermaid, and then all of that with Brock, like right around there, like there was some really good, like Will was talking about, some really good Brock one-liners, just made me laugh, and then we had that incredibly somber moment afterwards where Brock's like, "That's what happened. I died," and it was like that sort of juxtaposition of Brock at his most raunchiest and most hilarious to me, compared to Brock being like, that son of a bitch, like he went and pulled me out of the well of souls. That was a really good, I thought, sort of sandwich moment there, which actually made it even a little bit harder for me to hear, like later in the game after Brock's died, um that he's dead and he has no afterlife because Sindri couldn't save that fourth part of his soul. So in some ways, when Sindri brought Brock back, he doomed him in a whole other way, because now that Brock's dead again, he doesn't even get to go back to the Well of Souls to reach the afterlife. And I'm like, wow, that is incredibly shitty. And that was just sort of a line from Mimir when I was on a sled, and I don't know if everyone heard that or if that was just a throwaway line from him, but like that's some pretty sad endings for Brock.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I'm glad they paid off that arc too, because when Sindri, I think it's one of the scenes where segments where you're playing is Atreus and Sindri's your companion, and it kind of happens in banter, which a lot of stuff happens in banter in this game because players never stop talking. But so like it sounded kind of like a throwaway bantery thing at first when Sindri's telling you what happened with Brock. But I'm glad that this is one of the threads where they actually followed through on. And yeah, all of what you were saying, what you just said, Paul, of like Brock's ultimate fate and how all that panned out and how he realized what happened, and then you know, uh, didn't have an afterlife, and then that explains why Sindri, went fully unhinged, is because he knows what he did and what that has cost Brock, and like all of that just tying together to like have a complete arc. I think I'm glad they paid off that arc, because I feel like there's a lot of banter that just exists as banter and doesn't actually connect to anything.
Yeah, for sure.
Um,
Yeah, brother.
So yeah, now we'll kind of turn to the final little stretch of the game because Tyr is revealed to be Odin in disguise, and Tyr murders Brock when they're about to make their kind of final move. I think he takes something from them, or he does something. There's like a pivotal moment where he can like get something from them, and
He
that's when
tries to get the mask.
Yeah, he was
Right,
trying to
yeah.
get the mask.
He's trying to get the mask, so he breaks cover to do that, and that kind of initiates the whole Ragnarok end game. I think there's a little prep left after that, but like once that moment happens, it's like Ragnarok's coming. There's going to be a war. It's rally the troops, and you make your assault on Asgard, and kind of jump to the scene where, yeah, you do actually get to Asgard, and you're you're commanding this. Well, you're not really commanding it as the player, but you're running through Asgard fighting a bunch of stuff while all of the troops you've rallied are doing their thing, and you get a lot of cool visuals in the background of like of everyone fighting stuff. You see Thor zipping around in the sky fighting. I'm blanking on the giant.
Jormungandr.
Yes,
Jormungandr.
yeah, fighting him, and you see Valkyries flying around. You see all just all sorts of stuff in the background, and I thought that was a really cool scene. I was kind of surprised that whole thing wasn't longer than it was.
This is what I was going to talk about.
Yeah, me too.
Whoa, you two go
Go
ahead.
ahead, Paul.
No, so one of the things that video games I think in general are bad at, and this one didn't do any better for me at least, is climactic battles where there are supposed to be armies opposing each other. Like that just doesn't work in so many video games. Like and I didn't really expect it here, but the way that the characters talk about it is it's a huge battle with all the 9 realms against Asgard. What it actually was some really awesome set pieces and scenery, like you said, Flex. But then it was just you and your companion just kind of running across with some flashes of some of the other, it's like some of the other Valkyries and things like that. You get to see a whole bunch of gates explode and a whole bunch of things happen, but there's no sense of scale in terms of like Asgard being a fully realized realm and not just like a 300-person village with 24 folks on the outside of it. So I didn't expect them to be able to do that because I know the limitations of game design and hardware and blah 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 blah. But it makes me feel sad whenever I see them talking up something like Ragnarok narratively, and I just know in real life it's like, listen, you can't have that many individuals on the screen. You and I both know that, so you're going to have to do some kind of tomfoolery here, and part of it was this was a really short section. And I really wasn't happy with the way that it ended, which was just sort of like, 4 individuals standing in front of like, Odin's hall. I was supposed to be sold on armies and this and that and the other, and instead it's just we're gonna make it to the wall in a really short amount of time, and then all of a sudden we're in the same arena where we fought, before, and now we're just doing some boss rush, and that felt a little short to me.
This whole last section of the game felt rushed to me, and even before you start Ragnarok, like the gathering of the armies felt rushed in a weird way, where it was kind of like what I was saying. There was no sense of scale to gathering the 9 realms. It was just 6 people in a room saying, let's go gather the 9 realms, and then each of them goes off on a 10-minute side quest and somehow gathers the whole army of that realm. Like, you only do one of them to get Surtur, and that was kind of that I didn't hate that quest, but like it was pretty short and like kind of just like worked out really quickly in like the best way possible for everybody, and like there was no depth to it at all. It was just like, yep, let's go get Surtur. And then by the time you do it, like all the other random NPCs of your crew had recruited the army of hell, and the elves had made peace off screen and were going to be there. And it was just really weird and rushed. And then like Paul was saying, like the whole battle was so it was it wasn't bad. I enjoyed the spectacle of what they had, but I felt like with the history of God of War specifically, even I think they have done scale before in a way that is much more like palpable and much more like something you feel as the player better than that Battle of Ragnarok was portrayed. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's a comment. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of things to say about this final segment, but that was one of the things, main points I was going to make is I feel like so to give away some of my ending thoughts is I still don't think I like these two Norse games as much as I liked the original trilogy, and one of the reasons is I think the original trilogy not that a game has to do this to be good, but I think this has always been one of the things God of War, like that original trilogy, did really well, is doing that kind of scale. And I feel like, and I don't know why, maybe they were just going for a different thing, but I feel like the Norse games didn't really do that. And I feel like this whole Ragnarok ending was the perfect opportunity to have a huge scale set PC interactive, spectacle thing, and like kind of, end this Norse arc of Kratos's journey with a big powerful moment and be like, yeah, this is we're ending this God of War game with a big God of War moment. And it kind of just didn't happen. Like you end up going through like a lot of these basic trenches that basically play out like every other mission in the entire game, which is like pretty linear, just combat trenches with banter in between fights, which is what pretty much every mission in the game has been. Which is, yeah, it definitely felt like a letdown. And then I think even the ending fights with Thor and Odin didn't feel that special to me, and also ended up being kind of predictable. Like I think there were some good lines in there and some good dialogue, but like I don't know. It kind of felt like going through the motions at that point. It's like, I think like before all the Ragnarok stuff kicked off, like I had already like made the decision in my head that like, okay, Kratos is going to live. They're going to kill Thor and Odin. Like that's the most straightforward path for this game to end. And that's exactly what happened. And I felt like there was no real, I don't know, no real nuance to how that played out at the end. It was just pretty straightforward. And I did kind of find that disappointing. Do you have any thoughts on this section, Will, before we kind of turn to like kind of tying it all together and wrapping it up?
Well, I mean, I kind of hear what people are saying about Sindri. I think that's something that I don't know. I guess it was interesting to me because, like, as that scene was going, I guess it's tough because having been there with Brock, as Kratos when you were getting the Draupnir, spear forged, you know, you almost felt like Brock felt like he was a monstrosity, and he felt, it seemed like he was kind of coming to terms with like feeling unwhole, feeling like he wasn't himself and he wasn't a full person, and kind of mulling over the ramifications of that. And so then when he actually died, it didn't feel to it felt to me like, okay, things have been finally fucking put right, because the fact that he was kept alive was kind of an abomination. Like actually him dying. I mean, of course, it's not good that Odin did it, and of course it gets everybody upset, and of course it sucks. But from another perspective, it's sort of like things have been sort of put right. And so I guess when I saw Sindri be so incredibly, especially when you look at Freya, like Freya got fucked over in this whole series, like, I mean, she has been, you know, tied to a certain realm. Her son was killed. She's been, fucked over by Odin. But at the end of the game, when you're walking by, she's like, I think I found a new family in Kratos and in Atreus and in Mimir. and in the elves, I've come back and I've like created a new family. And to me, every opportunity was there for Sindri to do that. But he's fixated on his stupid brother who should have died a long damn time ago. And he's got all these people around him who love him. And instead he's going to be a little pouty asshole, you know? And so then when I started reading things about this game and people were like, well, I'm glad they didn't just tie it up for Sindri. I'm glad he was still angry at the end. It made it feel more real to me. I was like, yeah, I guess. It just made me hate him, because to me, I guess I didn't feel like it was justified at all in the context of the game. And of course, in the context of what he had done. But, maybe I know that's me and I'm getting heated, but I guess that was one of the story beats that pissed me off, was watching
we got
him throw his
a
little tantrums.
cool Will down here. He's getting a little heated. I think to me, I didn't read it so much as Sindri was mad that Brock was dead. I think Sindri was mad at himself for what he had done to Brock and how Brock is now like robbed of his afterlife and like put in a crappier place. I at least that was my read on it. It was more anger at himself and just anger at the whole situation, which in a way kind of ties in.
I don't know. I mean, he seemed pretty furious at Atreus and Kratos, though. I mean, especially at one point, he was like, he's like, you just take, and you never blah, 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 blah. And so that to me
Yeah,
made it seem like it
I
was
really thought it
outwardly
was like
directed,
Sindri
Like,
basically blaming Kratos and Atreus for Brock dying because if we'd never come along, he'd still be him and his brother wouldn't be speaking, I guess. But like it's kind of our fault for going and getting Tyr and bringing Tyr back to the house, and then it ends up that ends up being Odin. That's why I think Sindri could be a villain in the next game because he's so angry at those other people who he really shouldn't be angry at.
I think
Yeah,
I think it's all of the above. I think he's angry at himself and others who have kind of brought some level of despair and destruction on him and his family, including Odin, including Kratos and Atreus. I think he is definitely angry at himself and lashing out. I think it is supposed to be a pretty, I mean, not necessarily in a bad way, but a little bit, I guess. Like I think it is a pretty straightforward case of like, oh, his whole world is shattered and he's just lashing out at everybody with this violent anger and doesn't know what to do. And you could like that or not. I don't know that I feel super strongly about that particular like character trope that shows up a lot in different types of stories, but like somebody just completely losing it because they had one really bad thing happen to them, basically. But I think that is what they're trying to convey.
Yeah, I think that's the way he lashes out is against everyone else, or at least that's how I read it. I think for Sindri it's kind of amusing because and maybe he has such anger because he's always been the character that like, I mean, his whole shtick is he's a germaphobe, so like his whole thing is keeping things organized and orderly and contained, and this to me felt like he finally can't control and keep things clean, and it's just I don't know, it's just like, okay, all of that built up over forever is just bursting out. But also 100%. I think and also I think this is I think he is like he's like one of the more surprising late game twists, because a lot of this game, so I think I mentioned earlier, I have like kind of two overarching themes or theses. One was prophecy, we already talked about. The other one to me is the idea of redemption. And obviously Kratos is the main one, is like Kratos did all sorts of bad things throughout his life. And a lot of, in my opinion, the Norse arc, and especially in Ragnarok, is how does he live on with what he's done? How does he kind of change his ways and redeem himself? And like there's a lot of good dialogue he has of like, yeah, he can't change the past and he doesn't necessarily like regret his decisions, even if he regrets what has come from them or doesn't like what has come from them and recognizes that it's been a lot of bad things. Um, but there's, his Kratos's own history is he got tricked into killing his wife and daughter, and then his anger exploded, and he lashed out at everything and everyone around him, kind of like Sindri's doing, and he murdered a whole pantheon of gods in his just uncontrollable anger because he was having nightmares, and it's just like this totally unreasonable explosion of anger. And we kind of see that in multiple characters too. I mean, Freya kind of did it. You killed Balder, and like she has, not to the scale that Kratos did, but she has this uncontrollable rage and anger, and she spends a lot of Ragnarok trying to kind of figure out how to deal with that and redeem herself. And I think it's a weird. I don't know that it's a great twist, but I think it's a interesting or amusing one that the one character who kind of doesn't seem to be able to find peace and redemption at the end is Sindri of all people. He's the one who like just kind of can't find a way to deal with it. We also get good banter from Mimir, like the side quest you mentioned, Will, with the chained fish. Like that was Mimir's doing that he chained the fish. Or the big whale thing. So even in side quest, you get from like other characters like Mimir, you get like, oh, they've done these bad things. How do they atone for that? How do they redeem themselves? Like you get a lot of that for side characters and as well.
Yeah. I think there's this. I think the redemption piece. I think another theme, and I don't mean to add more complications to everything, but is this idea of sort of having a family and a community. I think that's one of the big differences. Is after Kratos kills his family, like he doesn't really have anybody. And of course Freya kind of isolates after Balder dies. And it seems like when everybody is doing well, and this is the theme that I feel like echoes in our actual lives as well. It's when you have like kind of support and you have a community, and there seems to be, and I even like the fact that at the end, Odin's by himself, because he's never really seems to have like figured out that like, whatever it is that he's going to have to face, it's going to be more important. It's less important that he knows exactly what it is, and more important that he has people alongside him to help him along, And so I love the fact that at the end you fight again, like it's like 3-on-1, like it's like, and that's one of the few fights, that you have in God of War where you've got like boss fights, big bad boss fights where you actually have a squad with you. That sort of having the support of a kind of a community, or having sort of a family, seems to be something that can stave things off, which I guess is one of the reasons why it's tough to see Sindri kind of totally isolating at the end, as opposed to leaning on the people who care about him.
Yeah,
I agree.
He's definitely not in a good mental state at the end.
I do think that this may not be good storytelling from their perspective, but I feel like of all the characters who've gone through what Sindri is going through, he's the last one to go through that, and there's no space from where Brock dies to the end of the game for him to make that turn. And I would have honestly expected there to be a post game side quest where you go find him and he's like starting to figure out what he's going to do next, but that isn't in the game. So that is sort of maybe like a weird thread to leave hanging from that perspective.
That's going to be the DLC.
Yeah, it might be DLC.
Actually, they've said there's going to be no story DLC. But
okay. I think just to kind of wrap up my thoughts on Sindri, since we've talked about it a lot, I think a lot of what you're saying, Will, is valid and makes total sense from a storytelling perspective. I don't know that it actually works, and maybe this reflects poorly on me, but I actually saw his unhinged mode at the end of the game was almost like comedic, to me. Like, it was just funny that he was popping in and out of existence and just blowing everything up, just completely stone cold. Um, so that's why I ended up liking it so much. Um,
It's pretty funny when he turns and like stares down Kratos. Kratos says like Sindri, and then he just turns and stares at him. And at that point, you kind of don't know. You're like, well, what's he gonna try and do? Is Sindri gonna try and take on Kratos? And you're like, well, And then I think he sees better of it too. He's like, okay, so this wouldn't go well for me. You know what I mean? So yeah, I don't know. I mean, and Sindri's capable of quite a bit. You know what I mean? I mean, even though he's a tiny little germaphobe, I mean, some of the things that he does in terms of just like the dwarven magic and technology. I mean, I don't know. He seems formidable.
Yeah, he definitely has. I mean, he does some pretty powerful stuff there at the end. Um, so yeah, I mean, there's a billion things we could talk about, could continue to dig into. But I think we're gonna wrap up this podcast. So I kind of go around and get everyone's final thoughts of like, what did you think of the game overall? Nate, you want to start us off?
Sure. I was surprised with how much I liked it compared to the 2018 game, which I still liked the 2018 game, but I had a lot of issues with the leveling gear system, side quests design, all that stuff that sapped a lot of my enjoyment. And this game, like I said earlier, completely smoothed all that stuff out for me, and I ended up engaging with a lot of it and enjoying a lot of it and spending a lot of time with it. And like we've talked about, there's just so many good, well realized characters, good moments, good scenes. Even if it all isn't perfectly structured together in a way that always made me feel like I knew what was going on and why. The journey was fun. The combat was fun. Overall, had a really good time with it.
Cool. What about you, Paul?
Yeah, I think that there may be a little bit of a disconnect between my comments here on the podcast and how much I really enjoyed the game. I pretty much once I started playing, I pretty much played every night until I had gotten done with what I wanted to get done with. So this was one of those where I really didn't put it down once I picked it up. Um, and I know Steph's not on the podcast, but she really enjoyed watching. So I think she actually watched the entire game, the entire playthrough. So she was a big fan of the story and the characterization there as well. You know, I'm I don't really do lists or game of the years because I don't normally play enough stuff in a given year to really have a like one of those. But this was one of the most enjoyable games I played probably in the last 3 or 4 years off the top of my head. There's definitely a list up there I could probably dig into. We could have an Elden Ring God of War debate for the next 4 hours, but really, I enjoyed my time with it. I liked basically every single part of it, and even for the things that I'm nitpicking because they did so well in so many other spots that it when it's not completely perfect, it makes me go, well, hey, you did it just fine over here, so why didn't you have the same care over there as well? But I think Sony did a great job, and I don't know what the next thing out of the studio is going to be or what the next future for God of War looks like. But I'm not quite tired of this formula that they've come up with. If they can tweak it a little bit, then I'm here for some kind of Atreus bringing back the Giants. Like if that's the next one of these, and it's mostly focused on him, and they can give me some gameplay variations, then I'm definitely here for it. And I think that they made Kratos into a really interesting character, and I think that he's gotten a good ending if this is his ending. But I also wouldn't be surprised if he shows up somewhere else too. So just really enjoyed it, and I'm kind of looking forward to seeing what they do next with it.
Yeah, Kratos' whole arc of how he ended up and where does he go from here is, I think, a very interesting topic that could be a whole nother podcast on its own. What about you, Will?
I do feel like I like this iteration more than the previous one. I think the previous one I probably put at something like number 8 for my favorite games, I guess, of what is it, 2018?
Yep.
I think that's right. And this one, I just kind of solidified a top 10 list now, and I've got it at number 4. So I definitely liked it more. Um, what Paul said begs an interesting question, which is sort of, he said I like Kratos' arc, and you wonder if they hadn't made Kratos to some degree feel more vulnerable than he did in the previous games, if we would be capable of relating to him in the way that we do. So I guess to me it's an interesting thing. I mean, I like the fact that they're spending so much time and resources on storytelling and production, on getting the mocap and the animations right and getting the voice actors doing excellent work. I like all of the movement in that way, but then there's still some part of me that, despite the fact that we now have more build options, I feel like so often for me, Kratos has felt kind of just weaker in these two games than he did in the previous games. And I think it comes into gamer motivations. We talk about power fantasies and things like that. But I guess I'm curious if what my thoughts on the game would be had I stumbled on the build that Nate's using. If I would have felt more like the Kratos that sort of I knew. I think there's some part of me that always, whenever they make a dig on the Blaze of Chaos, like there's this idle dialogue where, Atreus mentions that he likes the axe the best, and at one point, Kratos calls the blades sort of hateful, but hateful things have their uses. And there's this sort of like digs that are kind of made at the blades as sort of like this shameful relic. And I guess as someone who really enjoyed that previous iteration of Kratos, um, I don't think it's anything to be ashamed of. Now, certainly, like the simulated sex scenes and stuff that happened in the old God of War games were not something that we should bring into the present day. But I don't think there's anything wrong with an unabashed, ragey power fantasy, And so I don't want the developer to feel ashamed of that. But anyway, so forth. I like the game, and I'll leave that there.
Yeah, I actually we didn't get to dive into this, but yeah, I actually kind of like how do I say this succinctly? I I think they did really good character work with Kratos and him being reflective and growing. I also think in some ways it's like one of the least interesting things you could do of just how do we get to the happily ever after of like so many popular blockbustery things do of like I don't know, just kind of wrapped everything up in like the way you would expect. And I think I would have preferred maybe something a little more interesting or divergent. Um, but that's a whole other conversation. But I also think it's kind of indicative of how I feel about the game as a whole. Is like I think there's a lot of things this game does really well. I think I do think I will. Hmm, I think it's a better game than the 2018 game. I think I like them about equally because I think Ragnarok is a more polished game. Like I think it's better written. I think it's better like the gameplay stuff we talked about. Like it doesn't have the same annoyances of the previous game. Like I think there are just things about it that are cleaner. I think it loses the impact of like being in the Norse setting for the first time. Um, but I think overall I probably enjoyed about the same as that game, and I did enjoy the game overall. I'm glad I played it. Um, all the things you all have said. It looks great. It sounds great. Like it, Um, and though I'm not sure I enjoyed the combat quite as much as you guys did. I think, and I think where I ultimately come down on this game is that like I think for me I do kind of digest it as this is a big blockbuster like game that um isn't going to stick with me as something like in 10 years from now. I'm probably not going to look back on it as something super that stuck with me super well, but but at the same time, like a blockbuster, it was something that I enjoyed playing. Like it was well executed for what it was, and like the moment to moment is like, oh, this is entertaining. um so I think that's kind of the role it served for me. um And I do think the original God of War games certainly have their problems, and I think definitely by God of War 3 the story totally goes off the rails. So those games are absolutely not perfect, but I think particularly the first game, but even the other two to a degree, I do think I still prefer that style of action game, like thinking mostly mechanically. Like I think I've enjoyed playing those games better, and I think I like the spectacle better. The storytelling of the newer games is almost certainly better, but I think most other things I still liked about the old ones better. Anyway, that was a bunch of rambly thoughts. It's late.
I
Well,
liked
thank
them.
you. Thank you.
I thought they were good thoughts.
And with that, I do think we're all tired, so I think we're going to call this a podcast. I have been Flex, joined by Nate, Paul, and Will. We've been talking about God of War Ragnarok, and that's going to be a podcast. Thank you all for listening. We are signing off for ATACS, and we will see you next time.